What's up, Trash Talkers? Here at Veteran Trash Talk, we actually vet our sponsors. We don't just take their money and run like a Butter Bar Lieutenant lost on the land nav course. Are you finally ready to plant your flag and claim your territory? Maybe it's time to use that VA loan to buy a home. Or hell, maybe you're looking to refinance and put some extra cash in your pocket for more questionable life decisions. Either way, the Veterans Mortgage Source, powered by Canopy Mortgage, has your six. Look, buying a home or refinancing can feel like getting overrun on a bad op. Chaotic, confusing, and full of obstacles that make no damn sense. That's where Corey and his team come in. They're like the QRF of home loans, ready to pull you out of the chaos and guide you to the best program for you. And trust me, they'll answer all your questions. Yeah, even the dumb ones. Whether you're a salty vet or fresh out of barracks still trying to figure out where your TA-50 went. Great service, solid rates, and a team that actually understands the military life. That's why all of us here at Veteran Trash Talk trust them to do right by every veteran and their family. Ready to lock it in? Give Corey a call or shoot him a text at 808-699-7874. That's 808-699-7874. Don't wait. Unless you like overpaying and getting treated like an FNG. The Veterans Mortgage Source is powered by Canopy Mortgage, LLC. All loans are subject to credit and property approval.
Hey, what is up? What is up, Gruntworks Nation, Talk Monkeys out there, and the Veteran Trash Talkers? I appreciate y'all joining us. We've kind of flipped to doing this every 2 weeks just to let situations develop, right? And I am honored and humbled to be joined by author Clay Novak here, and I'm gonna let him introduce himself in just a second. But there's just been a wild amount of things that have happened in the last 2 weeks, and so the agenda for the day. We'll go over your main brief, right? We'll talk about each COCOM real quick. We're going to dive into AFRICOM specifically on two fronts. Obviously, we're going to touch on the MOU. And then in the pre-show, I was going to complain. Well, I'm still going to complain a little bit about Mike Bose, but we're going to tackle the debate really ongoing about the CTCs and how we train for LISCO, and just, like me and Nick like to talk about the gospel that is violence of action and people that like to preach it, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about where the CTCs are at, what we've seen in our careers, and then we'll get some feedback from y'all. So if you have any questions throughout the show, please just throw them up. Without further ado, retired, and I'll only say your rank once, Lieutenant Colonel Clay Novak, please introduce yourself and tell the crowd what you're about.
Hey, Tanner, thanks for having me. I appreciate the invitation. It was a nice surprise from Nick to get the email to ask me to kind of fill in for him. But so I am a retired Army officer. I was an infantryman my entire career. I'm a GWAT kid. I did Iraq twice, Afghanistan 3 times. I did a year in Korea. I retired in 19. And Now I work a couple of things. I am an author. I have a book series right now. It's the Terry Davis series, 3 books. You can find them on Amazon. They're Jack Ryan, Jack Reacher, Jason Bourne, action fiction. They're not Clay Novak's war stories because nobody wants to listen to that shit. And then I sit on the board for a couple of different organizations, including the Alan J. Lynch Medal of Honor Veterans Foundation, which is a charity organization that benefits veterans currently in and around the Chicagoland area, but looking to expand that nationwide here shortly.
That's awesome. And so he was in the Medal of Honor recipient from Vietnam, correct?
Yeah, he was. So Al Lynch is the only living Medal of Honor recipient in the state of Illinois, and he is a Vietnam 1st Cavalry Division. I think he 68, 69. He was over there, and then continued to serve. Like retired, he transitioned to the Guard, retired as a first sergeant. So he stayed on for a number of years after the war was over with, and continued to lead folks, and then worked as a civilian in the VA system. Retired from there. So yeah, Al's a great example of, serving until you can't and then serving longer than that.
Dude, life of service, American hero. Yeah. Shout out to Al, man. And thank you for what you're doing with that cause. Like in obviously in the North Carolina area, I don't want to say we're spoiled because that's the wrong way to phrase it, but it's like it's not rare to drive around and see like a Medal of Honor recipient, like license plate, kind of in this neck of the woods, but it's always just super humbling. And just, I can't say enough about those guys. And I appreciate anybody, especially the nonprofits, that try to highlight their service and let the next generation know. Cause I think, I'm a history guy, and it's like, dude, if you just get humbled when you start reading a lot of these stories. And if you ever question that, guys, just go to the Medal of Honor, webpage and read the citations. Like you can spend hours being humbled. Like if you think you did, if you think you did shit in your life, right? If you're feeling yourself one day, just go wander over to that website and get humbled real quick. I promise it'll do it. It's amazing. The ones that came before us, what they've done. And so salute to those gentlemen. All right. Now, without further ado, I try to do this quick. It never goes quick, but I'm going to do the best I can. I'm trying to get faster. So in the last 2 weeks, right? So this is our COCOM for the uninitiated or new people, the Department of War, Department of Defense, or whatever, side of the aisle you want to be on and call it, right? It splits the world up into sections. And we call those combatant commands. This is the way I like to receive information because I was programmed that way, right? So up first, right, in AFRICOM, 2 major developments, 2 major fronts, right? In Mali, we had JNIM. Now, when I say JNIM, it's an acronym. I'm not going to spell it out because none of y'all care. Think Al-Qaeda, right? This is Al-Qaeda's African wing, and the FLA. FLA is a little bit different, right? But it's a renewed coordinated offensive, and they've been getting after what we would consider the recognized Mali government, right? And they relaunched some coordinated attacks on July 4th and really kind of messed up some AFRICOR, which is Reed Wagner. So if you're familiar with Russia's mercenary forces, Wagner is the Africa Corps that's sitting inside of Mali, right? This is the first major push since April 25th, and one in which they killed the defense minister, Sadio Kamara, right? And then we also had some major updates in Sudan. We'll talk about those later. CENTCOM, obviously kind of stealing most of the news, right? Depending on who you ask, the ceasefire has obviously collapsed, right? Because we're bombing them, I think, right now as we speak. But Trump just said it candidly that he declared the MOU further or over after July 8th, and Iran struck, I think, 4, and I think they've up to 6 now commercial vehicles. So we've done 3 rounds of strikes since then. I believe we're doing the 4th, like right now as we talk. EUCOM. Russia decided they needed to get back in the news, so they launched, and this is a tit for tat, but I mean, they're in a war, so I don't even want to call it a tit for tat, right? Russia launches its deadliest strike of the year into Kiev, over 70 missiles, 500 drones. We're looking at reports of 30 killed plus 90 wounded. And then they hit the Kiev region again 2 days ago, or 3 days ago, from the 5th to the 6th, and killed 28 then. This is deliberately met. This is the context here. This is deliberate right before the NATO conference. And PACOM, as we talked a couple weeks ago, it's no longer Indo-PACOM, it's PACOM. And then in the next episode of Talk Monkey, we're going to have a subject matter expert come on that just got back from Taiwan and talk with us about what's going on there. But more of the same, China's habitually line stepping over the Taiwan Strait and doing some first island checks that are not conducive to free trade. We'll just leave it at that. Northcom, obviously the World Cup's still going on. Thank God there's been no major security incidents and everybody seems to be behaving. Obviously America lost. And however you feel about that, like there's a lot of people I saw cheering the fact that we lost it, and no, that's not a good look. Please don't be that guy, right? It's sports. It's supposed to bring us all together. I saw Dave Portnoy pull off his American jersey, and I'm gonna throw this in the trash. Like, come on, deport, right? Like somebody call Secretary Mullins and get him out of here, and then he can come back when he learns how to behave. All right, and then also there was a major fentanyl seizure up to 100 million lethal doses on the southwest border over the fiscal year of 2026, and that's up to this point, right? That's a significant development. Obviously, we've seen border crossings go down tremendously, but we've also seen the cartels enable and start to leverage drones, which me and Nick have talked about extensively. All right, so that is your COCOM update. All right, so with that being said, I want to talk to y'all about Mali, right? I hope I'm saying it right. But so there's JNIM is what I call it. It's my Southeast Texas, North Carolina accent. It's going to go with that. So what you need to understand is right now you can look at Mali, and I guess we're ready to share screen, Chris. Let me pull it up for you. Boom. We'll go to the website here. Share. Boom. I think I know what I'm doing. It should be coming through. All right. Let me pull this over here. Sorry. Bam. All right, cool. So yeah, this is TocMonkey.com for those that have never seen it, right? I have you zoomed in on AFRICOM. Now you see right here, it's going to give you kind of your Intel report, right? But as we scroll, and you can follow me along, or you should be able to, you'll be able to see my thing. If you go over there to the task organization column, you start to see focused on Sudan, right? But we do have JNIM in here, right? And so as you pull in and see these guys, it becomes readily apparent, as we're saying, JNIM, you need to understand that Al-Qaeda, while Osama bin Laden has been eliminated as a threat, that it is still a thriving organization. And his son is still alive, right? That finally hit open source was confirmed about a month ago, right? And they're still operating inside of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and they found their affiliates in Africa. So once the French left Mali, right, Russia, and this is important, I think, this is only transactional. Yes, there are gold mines inside of Mali and things like that, but this is not the same situation that we're seeing inside of Sudan with the UAE and Saudi Arabia. We used to, obviously, we've had, I'm not sure actually if we're still there inside of Nigeria or Niger, right? But AFRICOM has a presence. Obviously, in about 6 years ago, we were very active around Somalia, but ever since we had the loss of life inside of Niger, right? Like Nigeria obviously has like a extremist problem, and that's what JNIM is like an extension of. So it's important to understand that while we're about to talk about how JNIM beat up on Russian mercenaries, and some people will cheer to that. The Russian mercenaries are absolutely fighting like Islamic terrorists, right? In this one instance, right? Sometimes we see them on the other side funding them, they're fighting them themselves, right? So what took place is, and it's being oversold, but it's just because of how Twitter is, and you can go and see some of the videos. What was interesting is we saw JNM use FPV drones to strike a fob, just to use kind of the terms we're familiar with, right, extensively, right? And then we saw the Mali soldiers, the ones that are actually part of the recognized government. We saw some of them try to run, and then we saw Wagner forces execute the guys that tried to run. So all that to say, this is an extremely dysfunctional situation, right? But their ability to be able to leverage these kind of attacks shows a bit of coordination, right? And so this is where I'm going to kind of talk to Clay here, because he's got a lot of experience, 3 Afghanistan deployments, with what we're seeing now is almost an extension. And you know, sometimes I go to bed thanking God at night that FPV drones weren't a thing when we were in Afghanistan, because that would have been a tremendous problem set for us to handle. Um, but and Clay, I'm not sure how familiar or comfortable you are with talking about AFRICOM, but I'm extremely confident you're comfortable talking about terrorist tactics. So, what I guess my question is, and this is what I've been struggling with, Clay, is like we have Russia here. There really doesn't seem to be. I mean, it's transactional in the sense that there are gold mines and it's a place. I'm kind of reading this as just power, the ability to show that they can still project power, even if it's this minuscule in a conflict that doesn't seem to be doing them much of a service.
Yeah, I would take it as there's potential here. You know, if you think in the back in the GWAT days, like when I was in 2P and I was in Baghdad, you know, in East Baghdad and RAO, you know, that was a test ground for tactics, for TTPs. So we would only see things one time, genuinely.
Yeah.
So it was Kataib Hezbollah. They operated in RAO, so they would come in with a new piece of tech or a new piece of, you know, gear or a new TTP. They would test it. We would never see it again, and then they would take it other places in Iraq and use it, right? So this has the potential for Russia to and the Wagner guys to be doing things in, you know, the guise of like, well, let's test it here in a much lower threat environment in Mali, and then we can export that information back to Russia and then apply it potentially into Ukraine. So they've got probably a lot more freedom of maneuver, a lot less security, you know, on the daily, on the minute, you know, security concerns. So they may be using Mali as actually a training ground or a testing ground for TTPs that they can take back and use against Ukraine. That's one possibility. But at the same time, you know, why else are they there? I think your power projection is exactly right. I think that's definitely, you know, speaks of old Cold War, like, hey, we can be anywhere, we can influence things. It's interesting that it's Africa because there's so much Chinese influence in Africa. And, you know, the two of them aren't necessarily trying to push each other out. But there are assets there. And when I talk assets, I'm talking financial assets, right? China's not in Africa because they're good human beings and they're trying to make things better. They're there to take as much shit out of there as they possibly can, right? And so I don't think that the Russians are stepping on the toes of the Chinese, although possible, but not likely. So I don't think, like you said, this is transactional in the sense of they're trying to scrape all the gold that they can out of Mali. I think this is more along the lines of, hey, globally, we're not stuck here fighting against the Ukrainians, and that's our only focus. We can still power project into Africa and wherever else we feel that we need to.
Yeah, I think that's I'm co-signing that. I think something that I did that I think is distinction here, and I think it's part of the human terrain aspects of what we talk about a lot, is that it's while we're saying like, okay, so you have Al Qaeda and then you have FLA, and that they did this offensive and somewhat together, right? It's very important that we understand that these are two separate entities with two separate goals. Like, so while the Al Qaeda aspect absolutely wants Sharia law, right? FLA is the analysis, at least from the guys that I follow that follow this, is that they really just want independence and that they want to overthrow, but it's kind of like the enemy of my enemy is my friend type of situation. But what was interesting to me is this was especially on the July 4th attacks, it was coordinated over three. And also, to me, it speaks to the degradation of Russia's intel collecting ability, right? Like, by all accounts, you know, it's to me, it shows a limited. What all they have down there is people, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, right? Because when you have two organizations that are not tremendously sophisticated in their comms discipline or anything like that, and they plan and launch like a 3-village attack, one of which is one of your major fobs, and you didn't do anything to disrupt it. I think it's an indicator of what their stature kind of posture really is. And so we're just going to have to see. It's something to definitely watch, because the Al Qaeda is still running like a fuel blockade down there. They've burned 300 fuel tankers on the roads, and that carries 95% because Mali is landlocked, right? And they get their fuel from Senegal and the coast and Guinea. And so that absolutely has spiked the price. I'm reading it right now, over 400% at certain points, from $25 to $130 per liter. And so there's a lot of pressure on, the Mali government, or I'll put government in air quotes there, right, to be able to answer that. And so if they're unable to answer that, and Africa is unable to help them answer that problem, one, it'll serve as an embarrassment again to Africa, or to the AfriCorps, so i.e. Wagner, i.e. Russia. But then also it creates a vacuum, right? And we all kind of know what happens with vacuums, and that is somebody step in. And to be determined who that will be. All right, so that is what's going on inside of Mali. Again, yeah, go ahead, sir. Or Clay, sorry.
I am curious though, like you tacked on. No, I'm here. I think might be a little delay, but the logistics of this, right? So you were talking about the fuelers. So like, I know this is power projection for Russia. I'm curious, because I don't know, is how is the logistics run for this, right? Because I know, and I know Wagner is who they are. I know they fall under, like you said, the Africa Corps. But are they really, and who's supporting them, and how is that working? Like if they're on an island out there and they're kind of fending for themselves, it just makes you wonder how long this is going to last, and if this is like a short-term experiment, or a short-term deployment, or if the Russians are there to stay, because logistics obviously becomes the key in this whole thing. How long can they survive there without, right?
Yeah, no. And one of the interesting things about this specific attack, and this is something that is hallmarks of Al Qaeda, and it's part of the complex nature of what they pulled off, is they waited from the capital. They waited for that convoy to leave, like to bring, like they were bringing more soldiers into Russia, and then they hit that, and they just balled them up. Like and you can go on Twitter and see some of the open source. It was rough, right? There's a whole lot of dead Russians in the desert of Mali right now, because their convoy just got lit up by a complex ambush. And so if they have refined that technique, like, yeah, Russia's going, because they couldn't land on the airfield because they were worried about obviously the indirect and the drone. Now that place is holding out. They've been able to take it by force, but they're absolutely isolated. And that was interesting to me, is some of the Mali soldiers tried to leave, and then Wagner obviously executes them. And so this could become, it's definitely something to watch. And I'll touch back on it in the next 2 weeks, and I think we'll have more fidelity on what actually happened and where this ends up. But definitely a problem vector for the Russian government to keep an eye on, because ultimately they're going to have to pull their guys out or kind of get back to the capital. And then if that happens, I'm sure you'll see mass atrocities committed by JM, because that's just kind of their style.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, you said China, which is, as Nick would say, in our favorite place is Sudan. So if y'all remember the first episode, we talked a lot about Sudan. And the reason we're talking about Sudan is because it's ports to the Red Sea, right? And the Red Sea, especially with what's going on inside of Iran, absolutely becomes critical, right? And so what I originally talked to y'all about is how the Saudis have put their pipeline, they flipped their pipeline, which pumps 7 million barrels a day, go and land to then get to its ports in the Red Sea and then try to exit them. And then obviously Iran is threatened to use the Houthis down there in Yemen to close the Bab, which is the strait at the mouth of the Red Sea, right? What happened that was interesting is Saudi Arabia was able to buy 2 RSF commanders. So if you remember, RSF is backed by the United Arab Emirates, right? We have this Cold War going on between Saudi Arabia and them. And they were able to buy them for about $2.5 million each. And so 2 RSF commanders have defected to the SAF with their troops. So that gives them, it's like 130 plus armored vehicles. I say armored vehicles, think Hiluxes with, Ditchkas on them. But so now this is where it gets interesting. And so UAE it is like we predicted on this show for y'all, right? The UAE is trying to force its hand in clearly pushing the RSF to make gains. The RSF has done that in some sectors, but the SAF has held the line. And now we have these two. Now there's some analysis out there by some of the African journalists that I follow that the RSF in the past has had commanders defect just to get close into the SAF. Because you got to remember these guys at one point ran the government together before they had a civil war. So there's a lot of commonality relationships going on there, but the turn has kind of happened. And on top of that, China came and announced that it is doing a major upgrade to the Port of Sudan, right? And so back to our, this comes full circle, right? You got Iran and Saudi Arabia. Wrap your heads around this, guys. Iran and Saudi Arabia. Iran is selling drones to the SAF, right? The UAE is kind of on the only. So we have Iran and Saudi Arabia. Now you can read it as Iran's just selling the drones and they're not doing anything else, right? For whatever reason, because they want to keep this influence. Enters the picture and is putting the industrial might to make these ports ready to be able to receive oil via the Red Sea. And so that's huge, right? And China also cut a debt deal with the SAF government. So they're really trying they're putting a lot of effort, right, into absolutely funding the SAF to hope that they win, right? But some analysts out there will tell you essentially that China doesn't really care who runs it. They just want whoever can actually protect the ports. But that absolutely feeds into what is going on with the MOU, right? And let me back this out. All right, cool. Chris, I'm good on the screen if you want to not share it anymore, man. So yeah, that I empathize with the State Department, even though Marco Rubio's kind of been MIA on a lot of this stuff. But that talk about when we were in Iraq during ISIS, they would call it like 5D chess. You know what I mean? Like how do you balance all of these things together? But just your thoughts, Clay. Like that's China coming in, backing them. We see this pivot towards the Red Sea, right? Saudi Arabia is doing its thing, and they seem right now, at least, to be. A couple weeks ago, it was kind of up in the air because the RSF had gained more control, but it's clear that the UAE is now funding more and more and pushing them to bring the fight to the Saudis' allies, essentially, while simultaneously Iran is selling drones to the Saudis' allies.
Yeah, I think, taking this pieces at a time, because you almost have to. I think China right now is anybody that can provide them oil, because this thing with Iran is it's affecting China probably as much or more as it is anyone else. So they're looking for like you said, anybody that can secure ports, anybody that can get them access to oil. Like they'll back anybody. Probably anybody but us, to be honest with you. And I think if they get desperate enough, they'll probably buy from us. But this is a cheaper way and an easier way for them to get what's not being provided because the straits closed with the whole Iran thing. So that's part of it. I think the Iranians right now, I think they would sell anything to anybody that would buy it. I know that they were obviously funding or sending a lot of drones. They were selling a lot of drones to Russia, and then Russia did what Russia does, and they reverse engineered them. They figured out how to make them themselves, and then they stopped buying from Iran. And obviously with the sanctions and trying to export, we made all that shit difficult. So the Russians couldn't wait around for Iran. So they'll sell to anybody that buy. They don't care who'll buy it. They're right now probably one of the high-end arms dealers in the world right now, because they'll sell anything to anybody because they've got no money coming in. No. And so chaos reigns supreme in the Middle East. You know, I mean, that is I think everybody except the people that live there benefit from chaos in the Middle East. You know, you could say that, you know, most of the problem with our DoD infrastructure, our umbrella of DoD is the whole war hawk, concept is that they just want war because it makes everybody money. So they're good with all that too. But I think, it is 5D chess, but I think that it's a combination of economics. I think it's a combination of global logistics. I think it's a combination of wars that are going on, truthfully, that have nothing to do with the Middle East. But again, it drives, Iran, like, okay, they can't sell the drones to Russia anymore. So they got to figure out where else they can sell them to. So there is a lot going on, and it's, I don't think you can take any of it one piece. Like, you could look at one piece and miss everything that feeds into it because none of it is isolated. It's like the biggest spider web, link diagram you ever saw, but it's also like every aspect of global governance, from economics to diplomacy to intelligence to, like, it is the dime and the dime plus. So it is. I don't envy the folks that have to put these pieces together, because I think it's so global that, you went through the COCOMs. Like, the most dangerous thing is that a COCOM becomes so focused inside of their geography that they forget that the world is a big round place and everybody talks to each other.
Yeah.
So, you can't lose sight of the tentacles that come out of China, because they affect literally every COCOM there is. And if you're just a desk guy inside of CENTCOM, you can't lose sight of the fact of or AFRICOM or any of the rest of them.
Right.
You can't just look inside of AFRICOM or CENTCOM. You got to look outside of it. And so I think those are the challenges for the intel community, is the cross communication between the COCOMs.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. And I think we've seen that, like, the Iran conflict really brought that to bear, right? When we were boarding boats off the coast of India, right? And so somebody's got to figure out, and I think our guys did it. I mean, obviously we set up task forces and stuff to try to do that. But when you talking about projecting combat power across several COCOMs, because I would argue this war right now we're in is really being fought on 3 of them. Like, this Sudan front is absolutely a legitimate front in this conflict, and maybe you could even argue UCOM, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, and that's a good segue to the MOU. Like, an astounding thing. Now, I am biased because I am a Turkey hater, right? Like, I am a absolute Turkey hater. It frustrates me that they're allowed in NATO, but I understand, you play with the cards you're dealt. If the world was perfect, we wouldn't have to do all this. But, I think the POTUS came out and said something remarkable at the NATO summit, where he was like, yeah, like, I was talking to Erdogan, and, like, I'm just really glad he didn't enter on the side of Iran. Right. Like, and it was like, what? Right. And, like, but he's not lying, right? Because going back to 2019, when Turkey came across the border into Syria, like that was a legitimate problem that POTUS had to deal with. Right. Like, he's like, I'm going, and now and I'm actually going after your allies, who were the Kurds. Right. Like, that's who I'm going to clear out of there. And then so that to switch to the MOU. Now, I don't think a lot of us, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. This is my biggest problem with the way this is being framed, and me and Nick have talked about this before, is like, Iran is the world's largest exporter of terrorism.
Yeah.
Which, by extension, this has always been my argument, is that means they're pretty damn good at it. And so therefore, the way they have responded, now, I make a difference between what the joint force understood they were going to do versus what maybe policy makers thought that they were going to do. But you can't convince me, and partly just because a lot of them are my friends, that the joint force was surprised by the actions and what we've seen post, the ceasefire, right? This is not, surprising behavior from the IRGC. Right. This is, in fact, this is about what I would expect, and I will continue to expect.
Yeah.
And so then it's I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on what are the COAs in your head, whether they be diplomatic or militarily, that you believe are like feasible, right, for the joint force and or policymakers to change the calculus of the situation we're currently in.
So I think probably the biggest thing is that with the MOU collapsing and us going back to, basically kinetic operations, for lack of a better term, we've got to consider diplomatically home front first. So the clock has now started again on the War Powers Act. Actually, it's over with. And so I think truthfully, with Congress out of session right now, I think the president's probably got about 2 weeks to impact Iran with, again, kinetic strikes, doing the stuff like we're doing tonight, last night, the last 3 nights, before Congress comes back in and they say, stop. Because there's enough votes right now where they're gonna make it from the congressional side. Either they're gonna have to declare war or they're gonna tell them to stop. Now, unfortunately, what that's doing is it's got the Department of Defense, DOW, whatever you want to call it, and the State Department trying to find new ways to continue doing what they're doing and essentially restarting the clock, right? So every time you've got this MOU and there's a ceasefire, right? And now President Trump turns around and he says, oh, well, we're just responding, right? And so the clock starts over again in his mind. And then he's got to defend that with Congress. But I will tell you that there's enough votes on the GOP side that they're going to make him either stop or there's got to be a declaration of war.
Because they got the midterms, right? Like they're about to go see their constituents.
Right. This is an election year, midterms as it is, but it's an election cycle. So you've got all of that going on. So there's got to be, they're looking in terms of time right now, time balanced with effect, right? This is an odd situation where normally we look at effects-based operations, right? Or time-based operations. This has got both because he's operating against the clock that is Congress. So whatever it is that he wants to do, he's going to have to get it done probably within the next 2 weeks within reason, before people start poking him in the chest and tell, and then this becomes a bigger issue domestically. Now, as far as legitimate COAs, I have said from the beginning, there is no way out of this without boots on the ground, as horrible as that sounds. And I'm not a fan of it, and I'm not a supporter of it. But to accomplish what I think we want to accomplish, which is legitimate change to a regime that is friendly with the United States, right? We're not just looking for regime change. It's got to be somebody in power who is friendly to the U.S.
That was one of the stated goals. That was
or at least neutral, right? But to do that, that is going to require boots on the ground. You can't bomb your way through that. I refuse to believe it. So that's like on the high end COA is that we're going to have to put folks on the ground either in small or large numbers. And in my opinion, it means large numbers to achieve that end, which is regime change, neutral or friendly to the United States. Now we can try to continue to bomb them into submission. The current Ayatollah has shown that he'll just bunker himself and he doesn't give a shit what happens above ground. We can bomb the crap out of that place and we can kill civilians all day. He doesn't care. Like that is of no concern to him. So I think, we could try and do that. I think it's a fruitless effort. And I think that negotiation, as they have shown, is disingenuous. You can't negotiate with these folks, right?
No.
So I think now that turns into outside. We got to start looking at outside of the military, outside of the military effort, part of diplomacy, and we've got to start going back to economics because that I think is the one thing that will sway them. So I think there's going to be things that Americans are not going to be happy about. I think it's going to be a lifting of sanctions. I think, which we'll all be okay with more oil because it's cheaper prices, but economic sanctions we're not okay with. I think the biggest thing that we should negotiate with them is not nuclear weapons, but nuclear power. But I think the negotiation point is who runs it. So if you go back to Chernobyl, right, and you look at what was truthfully one of the global superpowers and how much of a mess the Russians, the Soviets made of that, we can't have a third world country like Iran with nuclear power because it turns into a global disaster, a disaster that affects the globe, right?
That's interesting. Yeah.
Right. So I think the negotiation point economically is nuclear power for Iran run by probably the United States or a
some type of coalition thing.
Western, yes.
Yeah.
But I think it's got to be something like that. It's got to be economic based. It's got to be infrastructure based. But that is probably the direction we've got to go next, because the military options, none of them are good or they're not effective. It's one or the other.
Yeah. I think I said the other day, after the MOU collapsed, and I was just, it's a point of frustration. Obviously, like, I don't think any GWAT veteran with sense is in any way, shape, or form pro Iran, right? Like, these are the guys that killed our friends. But I got to the point, especially on just watching diplomatically, how I don't think it's unfair to say we've stumbled through this a little bit. I was like, you got to put 350,000 boots on the ground of a coalition of something, or leave and give. They're going to call the straight. They're going to, like, we can fight over what they call it. They're going to get it through the black market, dude. Like, they're not like that. The insurance companies don't want to deal with it. They will pay. With that, price will come down. Like, it will get passed to the consumer eventually. But like, to get business to usual, Kuwait would be screaming if all they had to pay was $2 million per ship to get it out right now, because they have no way to get their stuff out.
Right.
And so, and neither of those are great options, I think. And China has shown no interest in it. And they've historically did this. If you go all the way back to, Russia too. If you go Korean War, absolutely, they were cool. That war could have ended a year before it did, but China and Russia decided, or the Soviet Union at that point, just let them futile bleed out a little bit. Because again, for the crowd, you have to understand we are blessed to live in a country where at least seemingly our leadership cares about our population and quality of life.
Yeah.
You cannot extend that. You cannot extend that logic to these people. And you might think you can, right? But it's just, you're fundamentally misunderstanding your adversary, enemy, opponent if you do that.
Yep.
And yeah, I don't know. It's going to be, now that we're, my armchair analysis is that we'll smack them up pretty good again. We'll get some type of, hey, we're going to negotiate for peace by, I think he'll do it through the weekend, but by the time the market opens on Monday, there's something about a peace treaty thing is going to be floated, right? Because they're not going to, he doesn't, nobody wants to see the price of oil go over 100 again. And we'll just kind of see how that shakes out and the drop, like, I had some friends call me, oh, we could drop their bridges and power plants. I was like, you're just playing into the hardliners playbook.
Yep.
And I understand that you might think that that's going to work, right? But that is completely relying on that the IRGC gives a shit about its population, and if they have water, they don't care. They will absolutely let a humanitarian crisis unfold inside their country, and they'll blame the devil that is, in their head, they'll blame, death to America and Israel, and they'll say, look what they did to us. We signed the paper. We were, you know what I mean? This is all them. Like, that's what their population is going to get fed.
Yep.
Right. And then the pipe dream that these unarmed civilians are going to somehow uprise and take over, unless the CIA gets real funky with Mossad and starts buying off major sections of the IRGC, which I believe is completely unrealistic. And then there's always the plan of the Kurds, but Turkey, let's say that was a feasible co. I have grave concerns that it ever really was, but Turkey's not going to let that happen. Your NATO ally is not going to let the Turkish or the Kurds be armed to the teeth to roll on Tehran, because they know they're going to turn right back around and roll straight. Like, it's just not a feasible COA, guys. So another wicked problem. I promise, guys, next episode, unless something crazy happens, not going to talk about Iran, even if it might be. The whole point of the show is to be worldwide, and we got an expert coming on to talk to us at length about Taiwan. And so we might talk about it tertiary with China's influence, but I think we owe PACOM some love. Now, with that being said, speaking about representatives that don't seem to give a shit about their constituents, one of yours, well, he might not be your rep, but there's a guy named Mike Boast. He's the chairman of the House Armed Service Committee. And he sent an interesting letter. So for those guys that don't know, I'm a proud member, lifetime member of the VFW. I am on the legislative committee, and I'm the chairman for the North Carolina. So I can't hide from that. A lot of this stuff, I give you my analysis of what I think about this other stuff. Like, so everything before this comment does not reflect the views of the VFW. Now I'll talk to you about, I'll put my VFW hat on and talk to you about that. So I'm only going to brief this because I really want to talk about CTCs and I want to run out of time. I'm going to be up in DC next week, guys. And Mike Bose sent a letter to Secretary Collins, who's the VA secretary, asking him to pull the VA accreditation from the VFW. Right now, the VFW has thousands of VA accredited VSOs. These guys and girls are volunteers, right? They don't get paid, but they do comply with the VA accreditation process, right? And then they're available. You can usually find them at a VA, right, hanging out in the lobby, or you can contact your local VFW and they can put you with the benefits advisor or get up to the department level or district level. And actually you can talk to one of the VA accredited guys that'll help you process your VA claims. And this is all in response to a cartoon, which is a political cartoon all the way back from World War I, right? But all the way back to, we're talking about bonus armies and stuff. Like, the VFW has routinely used satire. And the cartoon upset Chairman Bose, and he accused the VFW of inciting violence against politicians, which was rich, right? And then so that would have been fine, cool. You know, where the VFW is inciting violence. All right, man, got it. And then they personally linked like one of our VFW members to use as an example, and so she had to deal with all the threats that come with that. So good looking out, man. And then but what was rich about this, and some of the documentations in the letter he sent, is he had questions, because for those that don't know, Grunt Style Foundation, who is a competitor of this Gruntworks, right? And I'll let Nick talk about that later, right? But they are competitors. They're in the shirt selling business. But the foundation, that's Grunt Style, the company. The foundation itself is paired with the VFW. It does a lot of great things for veterans. And I know Nick and me are on the same page there, right? And so they brought into question in the letter that the relationship VFW has with Grunt Style and making these shirts, right, brings into question our integrity, for a lack of a better words, right? And that we need to be looked at and scrutinized. And that's really rich, because what I know about you, Representative Bose, is that you and your co-signer on that letter, Representative Bergman, Bergman has taken close to $50,000 from Veterans Guardian, which is a company out here in Southern Pines owned by 2 retired lieutenant colonels and is the largest claim shark company in the country. They've made over $250 million since the PAC Act passed in 2022. They have been found to be operating illegally by a federal judge, right? Shout out to U.S. Army. What the fuck? They've been all over this, right? So they've been found to be operating illegally since 2019, when they received their cease and desist letter from the VA, right? And what I know is that it seems a little like, if you're going to say that the VFW has a problem with its financial tanglings with a for-profit company, in this case, Grunt Style, right, that you should probably check your campaign coffers, because it would be really nice if you would return the illegally gotten funds ruled by a federal judge that have been donated to you. And what I am personally interested in, and this is the part I'm going to clip so you understand, is that on July 15th, the new quarter for the FEC drops hit. That court ruling came out on May 20th. And we're going to be able to tell how much money you took after May 20th, right? And then we're going to Freedom of Information Act your records to see what conversations you've had with people And what inspired this very random letter that has nothing to do with the VA going at you for the Take Care of Veterans Act, has nothing to do with the VSO program that they run or VA accreditation. And so it's interesting to me that you would go after one of your biggest donors' free competitors. And so I'm really interested to see how that shakes out. And I'll end that rant. And I'll be up in Washington, D.C. to ask you about it personally. And in case you haven't seen it, I'm going to deliver to your office the court documents with Colonel William Taylor's deposition, which is about 38 pages long, these things, which is why they got a summary judgment against them. Right. And so that'll be fun. And I'm looking forward to it. All right. Enough on that. I owed that to the VFW crowd. There's another debate, right? So that's the VFW side. There is a debate ongoing on Twitter about CTCs. And these are our big training centers, guys, right? Like for the uninitiated, right? We got JRTC down there in Louisiana, and we have NTC out there in Fort Irwin. Oof. A beautiful place, I hear. I was never stationed there. I've only spent like a couple months there, but ooh. But I hear good things because Vegas is just down the road, is what they tell me. But I do have, and me and Clay were talking about this before. I have thoughts. The debate, just to frame it for you right now, is that the CTCs are not set up and not quantifying lethality enough, and that they're not really focused on training the current warfighter, the current generation, of how to conduct LISCO or data operations or anything. And I know you have some experience in this field, so I'll just be really interested to hear your thoughts on how exactly do you believe that that's valid, what you saw in your time there, these types of things.
Yeah. So again, for context, 10 years ago, I was Tarantula 07, which means I was one of the senior OCT, OCTs at the National Training Center in California. So the team that I ran was a battalion level team, and I did 8 rotations out there that year, evaluated 8 units that rolled through there. And so context of time matters. So we were in the transition from, training units for GWAT rotations to Iraq and Afghanistan. And the CTC itself was transitioning back to training for major combat operations, right? Tank on tank, Bradley on, and BMP kind of fighting. And so what I saw 10 years ago was everything from units who showed up not knowing how to train their own troops. Like we would have to baby step, we, the trainers, the OCTs, would have to train down to the lowest level to be able to even conduct live fires, because the troops showed up untrained because their units didn't know how to train them, or they didn't know how to train them on the tasks that they were supposed to be executing, right? They could go and do, Battle Drill 4, enter building, clear room kind of stuff, but they couldn't do anything else. There was no fire and maneuver. There was no, they couldn't do any of those things. So that was the bottom end. And then we had units that were really on the higher end of things and didn't need a whole lot of help from us as far as training when they came in for the mission set that they were given. Now, what we did see leadership challenges was we had, like, everybody there was a GWAT kid. And when I say that, I include myself in that, in the sense of like brigade commanders and higher, because we had division representation for a lot of these rotations.
Yeah.
So you had division ADCs. We almost never saw a division commander, but you did have the 1-stars, the DCGs or ADCs, whatever you want to call them, would show up for the rotation to replicate a higher headquarters element. Most of the time they just observed training and they provided a little bit of input and feedback. But even those folks and a lot of the brigade commanders were of the population that had been promoted because of GWAT. And when I say that is the Army specifically promoted a whole bunch of gunfighters, soft guys, into regular Army type positions, leadership positions, and then expected them to lead. Now I'm talking about guys who commanded Ranger battalions, or they were field grades in Ranger Regiment, or they were Delta guys, or those kinds of folks. And then all of a sudden they're a battalion commander or they're a brigade commander, and they haven't maneuvered anything bigger than a rifle company in 20 years. And now all of a sudden they're expected to maneuver in combined arms, right? Tanks, Bradley's, artillery, attack aircraft, fixed wing, CAS, and all clear airspace, and all those very, very difficult, all the things that you knew how to do, right? The things that you did for a living. They were expected to coordinate all those things, and the only context they had was GWAT. I mean, and so that 10 years ago was a struggle. Now, how much low intensity conflict, counterterrorism stuff do we need to train? And I would tell you it's a case by case basis. There are units like the 82nd who continually deploys to places like Syria and Iraq. And so they need that kind of stuff. Okay, fine. So maybe for their rotation, it's tailored to that. Everybody else, there's got to be a focus on getting back to maximizing your weapon system and killing the enemy. Like that's what our army needs to be good at. And I think there's a dual pipeline right now. You've got units learning how to do these things, but you've also got OCs learning how to do these things.
Yeah,
because they didn't grow up doing it either.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest, Ukraine changed. I don't like to, there's a lot of lessons to learn from Ukraine. And I was talking about this with some Gainey company guys. Gainey company is the innovation company for the 82nd. And we were talking about the danger of learning the wrong lessons.
Sure.
Right. But what I will say as somebody who has been to a lot of CTCs through this transition period, the one that is just been blown away, right? When we first started this, I'll give you an example, that the 2019 rotation, the talking point was like, I'd put up all these requests, GSR requests for radars or, FMV type of assets and drones and everything. And the drum that was being beat at that time was the days, and this is a quote from a high-ranking guy, the days of persistent ISR coverage are done. Well, that's not true, right? Like now it is big, and they were thinking about it from like a LISCO. Okay, you're not going to have predators. Okay, cool, right. I'm not. And then now we've seen this proliferation of it. So now it's almost like, okay, it's not, and this is where I'm going to, not to go off on too big of a tangent here, but the training the staff to understand it's not that you're going to have no information. It's going to be that you have tons of information, right? And how do you make decisions and shorten your decision chain and the way you can turn things and actually make like an informed decision to keep maneuvering, right? Because that's one of the lessons learned is like, oh, well, this Ukraine, I was like, guys, that's a linear defense. Right. And if America ever finds itself in that situation, this is bad. Like we're in a whole new, like we have done a tremendous amount of wrong. Right. If we end up in that kind of fight. So how do we do this rapidly to enable the offense and let commanders make the decisions they do? But now there's so many toys, right, that it's almost like the shiny object is the toy. And then back to your point, it's almost okay. We still have to. Right now there's academic debate of like, is the tank dead? Right. I would argue it's not, right? Like, I think maneuver is always going to be there. And so this, and I don't necessarily know the answer, obviously, that's why I wanted to have the conversation, but I do think it's the master the basics, right? There's some bandwidth problems we have with, and I used to be a guy that was like, well, drones just need to be an additional duty, right, for like infantrymen. I've pulled off of that because of this point right here is like, no, we have to, the bandwidth will become too large and there's only so many days to train. And so therefore door kickers need to be able to kick doors, armor guys need to be able to maneuver their armor. It's probably not a great idea to then burden them with this sexy skill set that's going to take time to master. Right. And then you're going to lose, don't even start talking about maintenance in those aspects. And then terrain, I think a big part of it, at least Kona's side, is there's just so few places.
Yeah.
And this might surprise some people. There's always going to be There's some guys out there that I philosophically disagree with on a lot, but one thing I do agree with them on is like, the Louisiana maneuver concept. While I'm not necessarily like, I don't think it's extremely realistic. It's clear to me we got to figure out a way to get some space, right? That's not in the desert, right? For guys to actually figure out how to move, because you can't bring, like, they'll augment us with a company of tanks if you go down to JRTC, or a company of strikers, but
It
it's not
can't
realistic.
go.
Yeah, you're not going anywhere, right?
Yeah.
So it's something, and that was one of General Donahue's for the rant I did a couple weeks ago. He was like, I don't care where you got it. He was looking for spots around the country to go train where he could get big, you know what I mean, and really test. And so, and then another small rant to your point about the division headquarters, the CGs out there, guys, and this is a problem I have with the 82nd for sure. It's awesome that you go out there and you sit at North Fort, or you go out there to Irwin and you play high con. You are doing your formation. I understand you own the division, but you are doing that tack and talk a disservice, right? Because they are not feeling the friction of what it's going to be like to operate austerely, or whatever situations they're in, right? Like, you are not going to fight from a what do we call them, MTC, right? You're not like, and so I would encourage the senior leaders who I know some of them know this absolutely, but it's, the brigade staff's got to get in a fight in a way that is not completely controlled. And we're lying to ourselves when you send these high con elements out there. That's what they end up doing. They end up, it looks good on a slide that you're going down there to train, right? But it takes them about 2 seconds to flip to observers, because they didn't bring enough WASTA to actually control the fight, like not even close. The CTC staff's not going to burn them and sell them out, right? Y'all are like, the ops group's going to control it for them, right? And so then you just got an LNO in the room, and we have to get away from that. And again, don't know necessarily the answer, but it comes down to, there's going to be a lot of failures, I think. But we can't be scared of that failure, right? And you got to, as Tiger Woods said, you got to go get it out the dirt. And what I've been seeing a lot of lately is, okay, yeah, we're going to high con this JRTC rotation from the MTC at Fort Bragg. Cool. There's a snack machine there, guys. There's, like, you know what I mean? Like, you're not actually testing your comms, right? Like, and you're hoping you have enough satellite time.
Yeah. And I'll tag onto that, because the other problem that everybody's trying to figure out with you said it, with all these cool toys that we've got, these all require power, right? And power generation is a problem, because the more stuff that we add, the more draw that there is, which means we've got to generate more power, which provides a bigger signal. And then now you've got to balance it with mobility, because when you talk about drones, right, the thing that we can't have is the TOC, right? That's this enormous thing that is unprotected by anything but camo nets. And it's surrounded by generators, right? Everybody dies that way. Like, that's a horrible thing. But you've got to test it. And while they're playing high con at Fort Bragg or wherever, they're not figuring out all of those problems on how do we move a division size TOC? Do we move a division size TOC? How does it move? What does it look like? What assets are we using? Right. These new Chevy pickup trucks that are going to be charging stations for everything that we own. We don't know. And I know guys are trying to figure this out, but at Echelon, we're all trying to figure shit out right now. And what we haven't figured out, and I'm going to go like way high level on this.
Okay.
If you go back to air-land battle doctrine, which is like,
air-land, you're going old school.
That's before me. That's what was the doctrine when I was a kid, when I was a pup. But that was, the Army decided, 1, who our biggest threat was, 2, how we were going to fight them, and then 3, we developed all of our fighting and administrative systems to achieve those ends. So we decided it was the Soviets. We decided that we were going to defeat them in a joint fight that combined air and ground forces. So then we built things like the M1 tank and the M2 Bradley and the AH-64 Apache and the Patriot and the Blackhawk. And, oh, by the way, HRC was reformed from the old PERSCOM to support that, right? So even our growth, you and I were talking about, you know, the personnel management and career timelines, that was all built and based in accordance with, truthfully, air land battle doctrine. Most people don't realize that, but our personnel management was all part of that. We as an Army, and this, folks, this was Herculean effort to coordinate all of this and to do it all. And nobody in our military right now has the stomach or the patience to go back and redo that. That it's not happening. It needs to happen. But the first thing we've got to do is say, who is our biggest threat and how are we going to beat them? And you can't even get 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue to say that out loud.
Yeah, no, I had that conversation. My thing always comes back to the terrain. Like they'll be like, oh, we're gonna fight, you know, if let's say it's China, right? Okay, fine. Or let's say it's Russia. Like that was my problem with how we frame LISCO right now. And I'm like, guys, pick what piece of terrain do you think we're getting a division on? And like, where's this fight occurring? Right? Because a LISCO fight in PACOM looks a hell of a lot different than a LISCO fight, you know, in Iraq or in CENTCOM or in UCOM. And so that's it. I know guys are wrestling with this, and there's a lot of smart people out there. One of them, I'll give him a shout out, is Dr. Amos, that he runs the Small Wars Journal for Arizona State. He was very, I don't want to misquote him here, but he took a hard look at multi-domain operations, right? Which is supposed to be our thing now.
Right.
And then exactly to your point, how we're actually lining up to it doesn't, when you take a real critical look at the thought effort of, and a lot of that's inter-service rivalry. There's a million different reasons why we can't get right here. But it's certainly time to take a look at it. And man, yeah, we're gonna have you back on in there. I'm gonna get a little bit like, I don't know if y'all like, the history of Army doctrine. I've read a couple books on it. And you know, I got Arms and Influence right here, actually. Guys, if you're worried about nuclear power stuff, pick up this book, Arms and Influence, right? It's a good one. Yeah, I'd love to dive in this, because I definitely want to bring up our 4th gen cycle. I think is doing some disservice. Not that I'm against, like, I don't think stability. I guess what I'm saying is stability is not the answer. It's more complicated than that. Right. And that's a wicked problem unto itself. So, man, okay, we ran long, guys. I'm sorry. We'll chop it up in the review. Clay, thank you so much for coming on, man. And that was an amazing insight. And yeah, I'm gonna have you back on, and I'll prepare. Right, I'll nerd out on like the history of the evolution of military. There's some really good works out there for sure. And we might even do it like a panel style, because I think I can get some military historians that could give us some like long context, which I'm always really interested in, like post World War II and Gold Nichols Act and all this stuff. Like we could really get into the weeds on that. All right, y'all. I will see y'all in 2 weeks. I believe that I said Nick was at like the Palace of Versailles earlier. I think he's heading to Monaco right now. So we'll get him back. And y'all take care and stay safe out there. All right, y'all be good. I might